Okay, so this is our presentation on investigating gender on the frontier during and with the 19th century Crooked Creek Cemetery. So basically an overview is that university students looked at gendered language on the 477 pioneer graves to eliminate the assumption that words like mother and wife showed a lower status. The data that was collected comes from Crooked Creek Cemetery of New Concord, Ohio, and it was used over a 100-year period. So the study had two goals. The first one was to allow the community to collect information on the cemetery. That way they can have records and genealogy, which they didn't previously have. Like they had no consensus or vital records existing for anyone in the cemetery. Secondly, it was done by sociology students, and they were looking at gendered patterns associated with age and master status. So it allowed them to use their research methods that they learned in the classroom in an applied setting. So when these students went to the cemetery, they collected basic information like first name, last name, middle initial, date of death and birth, the age at which the individual died, titles and master status and gender. Also any poems or verses were recorded for preservation as well. Gender was then assigned based on the first name of each case, a familial status, like daughter, son, or wife and husband, were also recorded. And then the first names were considered male or female based on their common use during the lifespan of each case. So after a year of the original survey, another team ended up going back to Crooked Creek, and they had uncovered 40 additional gravestones where there appeared to be gaps in the rows. So after their findings, they brought the number from 437 graves to 477. This is a super small community, cemetery in a small community. And it's important to acknowledge that it does not represent the full community, and that there are likely many familial graves on personal owned land. This could be due to lack of funding to put individuals in the cemetery or just from personal preference. The findings, the initial survey yielded no significant findings. The most common season of death was spring with 91 burials. The season with the least deaths was fall with a total of 68. As the cemetery covers a small time period with a small difference between seasons for death rates, there's not much of a significance.
40% of the stones had gendered master status. Some also had professional master statuses as well, which showed their status within the community. Those with master statuses of wife or daughter were significant because they showed people who could not build a professional status themselves. Women were given a master status of wife as early as 19, where the earliest master status of husband was given to a man at 53. Only 12 men were buried with a master status of husband on their grave, 5 of which predeceased their wives. The other 7 outlived their, sometimes multiple wives. Men gained social status not through marriage, but by achievements and assumed leadership positions, not their relation to women. The default in the community being a white married male. So it is unknown why some men would have had a husband as a master signifier, except in cases where they died before their wives, who could have chosen that for them. 72% of the 202 females in the cemetery have the master status of wife, consort, or daughter. While this could show the claim of women as another arm of property for men to show ownership over, the article argues that it could also represent the important role women played in a frontier community like this one, and what a loss it would have been for them to die as community builders and members. This is reinforced by the presence of infant burials, numbering at 21. 5 for boys and 16 for girls. Although there is a discrepancy with master statuses between the male and female children, all male infants receive the master status of son, while only 11 of the female children receive daughter on theirs. These infant burials show familial grief, but also a care for the community. 1/4 of the burials were individuals aged 7 and under. 1/4 were 8 through 35. Another 4th was composed of those aged between 36 and 68. And finally, the last 4th were 69 through 98. Half the burials in the cemetery occurred before the individual turned 36. Of the 477 graves, only 321 had age at death that were legible, 178 men and 143 women. There were twice as many females than males buried between the ages of 18 through 35. This can be explained as women were at childbearing years, so women were likely dying during childbirth. More females than men were buried in the cemetery, which contradicts research that showed that men in fact die at higher rates than females. Or this could just be because more female infants were born and therefore skewed the data. There were also more men whose ages at death showed them making it into the age range considered to be elderly, 55 and above. This does fall in line with other studies showing that prior to the 20th century, women died earlier than men. This study stands against other data sets for the time within similar communities, but its gendered master statuses tell a story about the time period. Those who survived the deceased made choices for inscriptions based upon their perception of reality. There is no indication that any one gender was valued over the other, or that master status of wife were used as a tool of the patriarchy in frontier New Concord.